Speculative zoology, also known as speculative evolution, is a creative genre of art and science fiction that explores hypothetical scenarios in the evolution of life, using rather than ignoring real scientific principles, and using these scientific principles as the foundation for creating plausible organisms based on what-if scenarios. This could be future Earth, alternative history, alien worlds, and dystopian nightmares. More on that later. Many authors have tackled this concept, like James Cameron with Avatar or All Tomorrows by C.M. Koseman. I'm not gonna be pronouncing it Koseman. The more famous of the bunch probably being Dougal Dixon. You might not know his name, but if you're anything like me, you probably owned one of these growing up, or at least very similar. I used to own a bunch of them, and I would have owned a lot more if my mom didn't tell me I had enough and stopped getting them to me.
Oh, you're so Portuguese.
I will never forgive her for as long as I live. Dougal Dixon was born 1st of March 1947. He is a self-dubbed geologist with a great interest in paleontology. And I know that might sound bougie to some of you, but that's just how grown-ups are supposed to say, I really like dinosaurs, so they don't give girls the ick. But look at me, I'm way past that point, so I'll just keep saying, I really like dinosaurs. By the way, they found a new Spinosaurus, and that's pretty cool. That has nothing to do with the video, it just popped in my mind. He first found his passion for, and I quote, strange animals when he was a little kid, like most of us. And the way he describes it is super wholesome.
Where there was this very strange animal that was chasing this bunch of explorers who had disturbed it in a canyon in Canada or somewhere. So this looked very strange, and I took the comic to my father and said, "Father, explain these things to me," or words to that effect. And he took down an old natural history book off the shelf, blew the dust off it, opened it up, and here were these pictures of bones, of fossils, of animals that existed years and years ago and no longer are alive, and that was it. I was hooked.
He wrote mostly visual guides, some of them aimed at kids, but I believe his notoriety comes from his more mature stuff. In particularly, the Speculative Evolution trilogy of books. Let's start with his piece on alternative history, The New Dinosaurs, from 1988. A speculative take on how dinosaurs could have evolved if, well, the meteor never happened. The first pages of the book are dedicated to explaining basic scientific principles and concepts and giving some context to what we are about to witness, and trust me, we are about to witness a whole lot. First, he starts by explaining, in surprising detail actually, the Great Extinction, or the KPG event. He also briefly mentions other theories for what happened behind the KPG event. It is nothing accepted by the wider scientific community, but it is at least interesting that they were mentioned at least. And of course, before we get to explore the new dinosaurs, we first need to understand the OG ones. What's a dinosaur? We need to explain this to the people who call pterosaurs dinosaurs, by the way, apparently, I don't know, maybe. And Dixon gives us a full understanding of their phylogeny and taxonomy, by the way. Like, this shit goes many pages long, explaining all the evolution and all of the genetic links between different dinosaur species. And he even explains continental drift, as well as how that influenced climate changes and how those influenced life to adapt and be distributed throughout the planet in the last 65 million years. From this point on, the book becomes basically a visual guide or an encyclopedia, with illustrations made by Desmond Morris illustrating what these animals would look like. Some of these are insanely interesting, some of them are just very long two-legged no-tail necks with scaly bums. We also get to see existent descendants of well-known dinosaurs, like the descendants of the Triceratops. Those are pretty cool. And of course, as it tends to be in evolution, one thing leads to another, and we end up with British dinosaurs, as well as dinosaurs who have evolved to not have front legs at all. Because they were so small they were basically useless, might as well just cut them off. And all of this in only one page. The book is over 150 pages long. There's a lot of them. In the new Dinosaurs, we also touch and address the funny question. Since dinosaurs never went extinct, mammals never got to fully evolve into the animals we know today. So, although we see some mammals throughout the book, they are very primitive. Some animals evolved to fill niches that would be filled by animals we know very well today, like giraffes, for example. Now they're basically giraffes, but with scales. I think they're pretty cool. The new Dinosaurs, although loved by many, at time of release that was not quite the case. There was a moment in time where this book was more like a great point of controversy and drama within the science community. Because it featured dinosaurs in a way that, at the time, it was considered to be way too far-fetched, and because of it passing the wrong idea about paleontology or about dinosaurs as a whole. Now I will deliver the punchline with this quote from Wikipedia. Several of Dixon's hypothetical dinosaurs bear a coincidental resemblance in both appearance and behavior to dinosaurs that were discovered after the book's release. Clap and laugh, everybody. Clap and laugh. Amongst these features, they refer to dinosaurs with feathers that at the time was not even considered to be a thing, but now it is considered to be the scientific truth. So much so that now pretty much everyone knows that some of dinosaurs were at least partially covered in feathers. So I guess Dougal Dixon 1, the rest of everyone 0. Later in 1991, Dougal Dixon released After Men, a book imagining evolution millions of years post-humanity's extinction. This book is less about actually predicting the future and more about having fun with the possibilities. But before we get into the animals that come after men, haha, this book also gives us a brief introduction to some of the science themes involved in the conceptualization of this book, to give both context and make the book easier to follow, starting with cell genetics and cell division. Nothing really above high school level. The DNA strands unzip, then an enzyme makes a short piece of RNA called RNA primer. The DNA polymerase attaches to this RNA primer and starts building the new DNA strand, adds matching bases A to T and C to G. The DNA primer is later removed and replaced with more DNA. Then the strand is sealed, forming the new DNA molecule. Nothing too complex, even though I kinda simplified it even more for this video because you can make an hour-long video about DNA division, okay? Then he jumps from genetics to natural selection, causing animals to differentiate according to better suitability to their environments. He also touches briefly on animal behavior in the sense that behaviors and strategies don't really affect how the animal evolves at all, and it's rather based on random mutation. Darwinism. You know, I made an entire video about, Darwinism. It is quite old, but, maybe it's funny to you. Maybe. He also touches on something actually very relevant for the book. Form and development. In other words, convergent evolution. Ecosystems are divided into ecological niches. And yes, it is pronounced niche, not niche, Mr. So, I'm not gonna be calling it niche. You can stop being a little bitch. Basically, animals who inhabit similar or the same ecological niche tend to share similar body traits, despite not being closely related in the evolutionary tree, because, in lamest terms, that's simply what works best for the job. Like here, in my favorite illustration, we have a shark, a dolphin, and an fish lizard, an ichthyosaur. One is a fish, the other is a mammal, and the other is a reptile. They are not closely related in the evolutionary tree, and yet they all look physically similar, sharing many of the same physical traits, because that's simply what works best for the environment they are inhabiting. Then after that, we also have the history of life, with the origins of life, early living forms, the age of reptiles, the age of mammals, and then the age of men. Technically still a mammal. And then once again, from that point on, it becomes a catalog of animals organized in biomes and ecological niches. And it also presents us with a brief story of how that animal came to be, down to their respective scientific names. There is a very cool interview from last year with Dixon himself, where he explains his thought process behind Afterman that I recommend watching. It is a 5-minute long interview, so go check it out. I am very sad that it only has around the same amount of views as my content, so please go check it out. I'm talking about the dude's work, and me and the dude are having the same views. This is bad. This is bad, guys. Here we have, for example, the Robux. The Rabucks, or how I like to call them, the Robux, are the first animal in the book and serves very well as a cool example of how Dixon thought about these animals. In essence, rabbits became the future deer. However, Dixon gives us a very cool example of an animal taking over another animal's ecological niche, giving us a few subspecies divided by geography. Their place in the world. Geographic distribution. We also see moles who have evolved to live in trees. Instead of burrowing on the floor, they start burying themselves into live trees, feeding on the nutrients of the sap and bugs whom they might stumble upon. Penguins have also evolved into gargantuan aquatic birds, filling the niche left by cetaceans and becoming filter feeders. That is actually pretty cool.
I thought, well, if the whale becomes extinct, what would evolve to take its place? And I thought, right, there's the penguin, isn't there? The penguin, it's halfway there. It's streamlined as an underwater hunter. It moves by flying underwater with its wings turned into paddles. The only thing that stops it from being at sea all the time is the necessity to come ashore and lay eggs.
Hippos also became fully aquatic, which is a neat detail. Some of my favorite ones would be the striker, a tiger who has evolved to fill a niche similar to monkeys. It's a cat with thumbs. And his prey of choice, the kifa, a descendant of modern monkeys who have evolved very secure systems in their trees. Basically, they became whatever this is. And then we have the island of
Batavia.
Basically a bunch of bats who have stayed isolated on an island. They evolved to be freaky, and some of them even evolved into terrestrial predatory bats.
One of the animals on a Batavia is the night stalker, and it walks along on its front legs. Now its front, because that is where all its locomotor muscles were when it was a flying animal.
You see this little guy here? This is a thing of nightmares. And there's a statue of it. I don't want it, but I do need it. Afterman was probably one of Dixon's bigger successes. Dougal Dixon, more like Dougal Big Dixon. What a knee slapper of a joke that was, huh? Being adapted into a stop-motion animation and an anime of all things. And that's where the statue of some of these animals came from that stop-motion animation. The first of which being available on YouTube at the quality of a microwave, and the latter now being considered lost media. Both of them were produced in Japan, and watching Mr. Dixon dubbed in Japanese is always a treat.
超音波で周りの様子を探ります。皆さんはこのバタビア諸島の3つの動物の共通の祖先お分かりですか?
This book was also the main inspiration behind Animal Planet's The Future is Wild documentary that I have talked before in the channel at a previous video. You can also check that one out. It is pretty cool. And now that you're there, consider a friendly click, or 2, or 3, if you're really cool. Consider a 4th one. I mean, you already gave the other 3, so... And the 4th one comes with the option of you leaving your opinion. I respect every opinion. No matter what opinion that is. So these are the 2 books present in the trilogy. And you might notice, trilogy means 3 books.
There is another.
And much like any other middle child, it is better left forgotten. Because this book is the only one I don't have a physical copy of. Because it was only printed once. Now it is considered to be a collector's item. Meaning, to get one, I would have to spend most of my Lego studs and be comfortable with living with only 1 kidney. And that's a price too high to pay. However, although it's not all I had to say, the third book will have to be talked about in part 2. But do not worry, part 2 is nearly done and dropping very soon, and I do mean very soon. So stick around, because Man After Man is the wildest of the 3, and I guarantee if you have a strong stomach, it's the right book for you. Now yes, with nothing else to say, I'll see y'all in part 2. Bye bye.